Good morning. This is the sermon for July 18th. It's on Mark chapter 6, verses 30 and following, the feeding of the 5,000. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and hurried there on foot from all the towns, and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "We have to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat." Let me rephrase. He said, the disciples said, we would have to go and buy 200 denarii, or 200 days worth of wages. And he said, "How many loaves have you? Go and see." They found out and said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave it to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled. And they took up the 12 baskets full of broken pieces of the fish. And those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. Please join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So Mark's narrative very much flows one piece to another. The disciples have returned to Jesus. They have returned after John the Baptist has been beheaded, presumably. They've returned from going through the towns and villages of Galilee, preaching and teaching, after he had sent them out towards the beginning of the chapter. And it seems like Jesus knows that they need some time together, that they need some time to rest, relax, and recuperate, that they're not ready to immediately jump into the next thing. Mark's narrative has been building steam, and pretty soon we're going to be heading towards the Transfiguration, which points directly to Jerusalem. So Jesus knows that his disciples are going to need a chance to rest, to relax, to recuperate, to be together, to pause how they are going to be. And so he says, let's go to a deserted place. Now, either they tell someone the deserted place they're going to, or it's visually obvious. In any case, Jesus, who is, at least on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, rock star famous at this point, crowds rush ahead of them. And Jesus, who could recognize that his disciples needed some time, had compassion, had love for these crowds, because he could see that they were like sheep without a shepherd, that they were leaderless. And so he teaches them. After that, perhaps he's not the best of planners. It's obvious that there's not enough food. And he gets a little bit of food, and he makes there be more than enough. So what does this mean for you? What does this mean for me? First off, I like that Jesus and Mark continues to, want to take care of people's mental or emotional well-being. He wants his disciples to go to a deserted place together. After they had been traveling through towns and villages, perhaps facing rejection, because he had warned them of that, he wants to give the disciples a chance to rest and recuperate. For many of us, Sundays are that chance to rest and recuperate. But also many of us work on Sundays and and have to find other time to rest, other time for Sabbath, other time to other time to be still and to know who God is. Jesus expects to give that to his disciples, but crowds beat them there. And those crowds are wandering around leaderless and aimless, and Jesus responds in compassion and mercy. In fact, Jesus' first response, Jesus' main response, Jesus' default, it seems like, is compassion and mercy. If someone is sick, he will heal them. If someone is leaderless, he will teach them so that they can lead themselves. He responds in love over and over again. And we're told here that that he taught them many things. Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus specifically said. However, Mark has been showing us what Jesus will do. Mark has, throughout this gospel, been showing Jesus healing, casting out demons, and now feeding people. In God's kingdom, there is fullness and wholeness of life. In God's kingdom, we are set right with our neighbors and with God. And in God's kingdom, there is more than enough to share. The economies of our scale do not apply in God's kingdom. In God's kingdom, Mark makes emphatically clear, there's more food than is needed. In our human life, we're all often trying to figure out how to stretch a dollar the furthest, how to make it go just a little bit farther. And yet, Jesus has no need of that. Jesus reminds us that there is always sufficient grace and mercy to go around, that you will have more than enough and more than you need. In the feeding of the 5,000, we are reminded that in God's kingdom, not only is there plenty, there is more. That we can depend on God's grace, overflowing our boundaries and expectations, like a river overflowing its banks, like a buffet that just keeps going, like sun streaming through the sky. In God's kingdom of mercy and grace, there is more. Today's gospel reminds us that God has compassion and loves us, that God teaches us so that we might learn, and that God promises us in eternity a multitude. Amen.